The morning sky over New Aegis was a pale gray, stretched thin by clouds that never seemed to fully let the sun shine. The wind blew across the jagged cliffs and rocky plains, carrying with it a sharp, dry taste, like the planet itself was testing anyone who dared to live here. From a distance, the colony looked orderly and quiet, a neat patchwork of silver-roofed buildings and small green gardens that stubbornly survived in the harsh soil. To any visitor, it was the picture of civilization on a death world. Everything was in its place, everyone polite, everyone careful. But those who lived here knew that this calm was just a mask, and the mask was slipping. Doctor. Mara Voss walked along the edge of the central courtyard, her boots kicking up tiny clouds of dust with each step. She was a human, like all the residents, but unlike most, she had begun to notice the cracks in their carefully maintained facade. The polite smiles, the measured words, the way humans nodded and agreed even when they disagreed. These were all remnants of a culture that had been forced on them by the Galactic Council. The Council believed that civility was the mark of a capable species, that politeness and order were signs of intelligence. Myra had begun to wonder if perhaps the Council had it all wrong. She stopped at one of the garden plots where a cluster of vegetables struggled against the dry soil. The plants leaned toward a thin patch of sunlight that managed to break through the clouds, their roots desperate for water that was often in short supply. Mara crouched, running her fingers along the leaves. "They're stubborn just like us," she whispered to herself. She could almost hear the faint, frustrated sigh of the colony's water management system humming in the background, struggling to maintain the delicate balance required to keep the gardens alive. The system was failing, slowly but surely, and no amount of polite protocol would fix it. Across the courtyard, a group of human engineers in crisp uniforms argued quietly over a broken irrigation valve. Their voices were low, careful, and polite, but Mara knew what they were really saying. "Why didn't anyone check this yesterday?" one muttered under his breath. "Because no one wanted to disturb the meeting schedule," replied another equally softly. Their eyes flicked toward the observation decks where alien dignitaries often watched the colony, and they quickly straightened, smiles returning, voices softening. It was a performance, and everyone knew it. But performances were exhausting, especially on a planet that demanded constant vigilance just to survive. Mara straightened and made her way to the central command hub, a sleek building of steel and glass that somehow survived the harsh climate. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the low hum of machinery and the occasional beep of a monitor. She passed her colleagues, all moving with the same careful, measured steps that the council demanded. She smiled at one, a quick flash of something real before she entered her own workspace. The room was small but efficient, walls lined with screens showing weather patterns, energy reserves, and population health. Today, the reports were troubling. The energy grid had a minor fluctuation, the water supply was dangerously low, and several crops were failing despite the engineers' best efforts. Mara leaned against her desk, rubbing her temples. The humans of New Aegis were good at following rules. They were polite, careful, and efficient, but they were also limited by the rules they followed. Civility, as the council defined it, demanded restraint, careful speech, and a reluctance to take risks. On a planet that killed without mercy, restraint was a liability. Improvisation was life. Creativity was survival, yet here they were, pretending to be civilized while the death world tested them every day. She had begun to wonder what would happen if they stopped pretending. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from one of the monitors. It was a message from the colony's food supply manager. The message was simple, almost apologetic. Water levels critical. "Vegetables at risk, need immediate action," Mara sighed. Another small crisis that polite procedures would take days to solve. She could see it clearly. If she followed protocol, the crops would die before the solution arrived. If she acted boldly, there was a chance they could be saved. The question was whether anyone else would be willing to act outside the rules. She tapped a few commands into her console, pulling up schematics for the irrigation system. The pipes were old, built long before the colony had enough resources to maintain them properly. Some were cracked, others blocked by mineral deposits, and the central pump was inefficient at best. Myra frowned. A standard repair would take hours, maybe a day, and then another day to restore normal operations. That was too long. The crops would not survive that long. She glanced around her office. No one else was watching, no alien dignitaries peering in from the observation deck. This was the moment to act. Without hesitation, Mara grabbed a toolkit and sprinted toward the central irrigation hub. She ignored the polite procedures that dictated a formal request be submitted, a review committee convened, and permissions granted. She climbed over maintenance railings, ducked under pipes, and began manually adjusting valves, rerouting water, and improvising a solution from spare parts. Her fingers were steady despite the chill in the air, her mind moving faster than any protocol could allow. This was what humans were meant to do: adapt, invent, survive. Politeness and rules had no place in this moment. Only action mattered. Meanwhile, the alien dignitaries watched from the observation deck, their expressions unreadable. They had come to see a human colony that reflected civility and control, a species that followed rules with near-perfect obedience. Instead, they witnessed something unexpected, a human moving with purpose, bending the system to save life, smiling and muttering to herself as she worked. It was chaotic, unplanned, and brilliant. The aliens whispered among themselves, unsure whether this was impressive or appalling. Mara didn't care. The water began to flow through the pipes, reaching the parched plants in time. Leaves perked up, stems straightened, and the small green patch seemed to breathe again. When she finally straightened, wiping sweat from her brow, Mara felt a rush of satisfaction. The crisis was averted, not through careful planning or committee approval, but through intuition, skill, and courage. She looked around at the engineers who had followed her into the hub, their eyes wide with surprise and admiration. "Why didn't we do this sooner?" one asked, voice quiet. Mara smiled. "Because we've been pretending to be something we're not," she said. "We've been pretending to be civilized." The humans of New Aegis were capable of brilliance, creativity, and resilience. The rules had kept them polite, but they had also kept them small, careful, and limited. Mara knew that today had changed something. A seed had been planted. A thought had emerged. What if humans stopped pretending entirely? What if they embraced who they really were: adventurous, clever, unpredictable? By the time the engineers returned to their stations, the colony was buzzing with a quiet energy. There were no celebrations, no dramatic announcements, only the subtle shift in the way humans moved and spoke. They no longer whispered out of fear of alien judgment. They no longer hesitated for the sake of appearances. Something fundamental had shifted, though no one outside of Mara yet understood it. Across the colony, small changes began to ripple. In the kitchens, cooks experimented with new ways to stretch supplies. In the workshop, engineers improvised new tools and repairs without waiting for permission. In the classrooms, children were encouraged to solve problems in ways no textbook prescribed. Mara walked among them, her heart light. This was only the beginning. The humans of New Aegis had survived on this death world for generations. Now they were beginning to thrive. And somewhere in the observation decks above, the alien dignitaries watched, confused, fascinated, and perhaps a little afraid. Humans were supposed to be polite, controlled, predictable. What they had seen today was none of those things, yet somehow it worked. The plants survived, the systems functioned, the humans smiled. Mara knew one thing for certain: the colony would never be the same again. For the first time in years, Mara allowed herself to laugh. It was not a small, careful laugh meant for others' approval. It was loud, warm, and free. Around her, humans began to laugh too, quietly at first, then louder, until the sound echoed across the rocky plains. They were alive, fully alive, and they were no longer pretending. The wind continued to blow across New Aegis, carrying the scent of dust, metal, and the faint hint of green leaves. The planet was harsh, unyielding, and dangerous, but for the first time, humans felt like they could meet it on their own terms. Mara looked at the horizon, at the jagged cliffs and distant mountains. She felt a thrill of possibility, of challenge, of life lived without masks. Today had been small in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough to start a revolution. The next morning, the sky over New Aegis had not changed much. The clouds still hung low, the wind still carried the sharp taste of dust and stone, and the planet's harsh terrain seemed to mock the humans who lived on it. Yet something was different. Even the air felt lighter, as though the colony itself had sensed a shift. Mara Voss walked along the narrow paths between the buildings, her eyes scanning the bustling activity. The humans around her moved with purpose, but their movements were no longer weighed down by the invisible chains of politeness or hesitation. They smiled openly, laughed freely, and spoke in tones that carried honesty, even if it bordered on chaos. In the communal workshop, engineers crowded around a newly designed water filter that Mara had sketched out late the night before. The filter was crude, made from leftover piping, metal mesh, and some discarded energy cells, but it worked in theory. The engineers debated loudly, voices overlapping, gestures animated. In the past, such debate would have been muted, controlled, each word carefully measured. Now no one worried about offending a visitor or appearing rash. Ideas flew fast and furious, some practical, some impossible, yet each one built upon the other. Mara watched with a growing sense of pride. "This might actually work," said one engineer, tossing a small metal cylinder into the prototype. "If it doesn't, at least we'll know how to fix it." She moved among them, suggesting minor adjustments, testing connections, and nodding when an idea showed promise. The workshop was chaotic, noisy, and messy, but it was alive. Each human contributed their strength, their ingenuity, without fear of breaking rules that had never truly fit the environment anyway. Outside, children ran across the rocky playground, their laughter mingling with the wind. They experimented freely, building small devices from scraps, inventing games that required cleverness rather than strict adherence to instructions. Teachers no longer insisted on rigid lesson plans. Instead, they encouraged curiosity and problem-solving. Mara paused to watch a group of children coaxing a small wind turbine to spin using scraps of cloth and metal sheets. The device creaked and whined, but gradually caught the wind, spinning faster and faster. The children cheered when it worked. One of them ran to Mara, eyes shining. "Look, we did it!" the child exclaimed. "It makes energy." "And you didn't wait for permission. That's how humans survive here." The smell of fresh bread and roasted vegetables filled the hall. Aliens who had arrived to inspect the colony hesitated at the doorway, watching the human chaos with wide, uncertain eyes. One of them whispered to another in a language Mara could not understand, but she caught the tone, confusion mixed with curiosity. Even the formal announcements, once stiff and emotionless, carried life now. Mara addressed the colony through the communication network, not in measured, polite tones, but with directness, honesty, and humor. "People of New Aegis," she began, "the water filter is working, the crops are thriving again, and the wind turbines are almost ready. If anyone tells you to stop experimenting, ignore them. If anyone tells you to be quiet, speak louder. This planet will not wait for us to pretend. Neither should we." Mara moved toward the northern gardens, where some of the older plants were struggling against rocky soil and harsh sunlight. She knelt beside a patch of wilted leaves and touched them gently. "We can help you," she murmured. She began to rearrange the irrigation channels, redirecting water from a nearby reservoir. She adjusted valves, created small dams, and dug shallow trenches to guide moisture to the roots. A young engineer joined her, following her instructions but adding his own tweaks. Together, they worked quickly and efficiently, laughing at mistakes, learning from them, and solving problems as they arose. A small crowd gathered, including aliens, who now observed with growing interest. Mara could see their confusion. They were used to control, structure, and order. Humans were unpredictable, untamed in their methods, yet remarkably effective. What they were witnessing was not chaos for its own sake. It was intelligent improvisation, a demonstration of how humans could thrive when freed from unnecessary restraint. By midday, the water had reached every corner of the gardens. The plants lifted their leaves and the soil was soft and moist. Myra stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow, and smiled. "See, we didn't need permission, we didn't need approval, we just needed to try." Today's topic was exploration, new areas of the planet that had been deemed too dangerous under the old rules. Maps were spread across the table, marked with rocky outcrops, steep cliffs, and hidden water channels. Under the old system, exploration missions would have required weeks of planning, multiple committees, and approval from the Council. Now Mara encouraged direct action. "We can do this differently," she said. "We don't need to follow their protocols. We know this planet. We know its dangers. We can be smart, careful, and quick. We don't need to pretend." Humans volunteered freely, offering ideas and solutions, collaborating across departments. There were no arguments about rank or authority. Every contribution mattered. Even the aliens watched, their eyes widening with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. As the afternoon wore on, Mara led a small team to the edge of the eastern cliffs. From there, they could see the vast expanse of rocky terrain, jagged ridges, and distant valleys. The wind gusted sharply, carrying fine dust that stung their eyes, but Mara did not flinch. She pointed to a cluster of rocks in the distance. "There's water there," she said, "and if we route it carefully, it could save the lower fields. The rocks are unstable, and the cliffs are steep." Along the way, they experimented with small tools, tested makeshift bridges, and even created a pulley system from scraps to move heavy containers of water. The work was difficult, but it was also exhilarating. Each human contributed their skill, their creativity, and their courage, knowing that the planet would not wait for politeness or protocol. By evening, the team had reached the target area. Water flowed from the reservoir through the improvised channels, reaching the far fields. The plants, struggling and pale, now drank deeply. Mara knelt beside them, brushing her hands over the damp soil. "We did it," she whispered. The humans around her cheered, not quietly as protocol would demand, but loudly, joyfully, openly. Their laughter echoed across the cliffs, mingling with the wind. The aliens who had followed from a distance were silent. They did not clap or cheer. They simply watched, unsure how to react. These humans were unpredictable, dangerous in their creativity, yet undeniably effective. Mara caught their eyes and smiled. She did not fear them. She did not seek their approval. For the first time, humans were acting entirely for themselves, using every strength they possessed. Back at the colony, news of the water's success spread quickly. Children celebrated by running through the fields, engineers shared tips for future improvements, and cooks prepared a larger improvised dinner using fresh vegetables. Mara moved through the colony, her heart light. She had started a small change, and it was spreading like wildfire. Humans were beginning to understand that civility, as the Council defined it, had been holding them back. They did not need to pretend to be orderly, polite, or restrained. They needed to be human, creative, adaptable, bold, and clever. As night fell over New Aegis, the sky a deep gray with stars peeking through clouds, Mara stood on the highest cliff and looked out over the colony. Fires from cooking and workshops glowed softly, illuminating clusters of humans moving freely, speaking openly, experimenting boldly. Laughter and chatter filled the air, mixing with the natural sounds of the planet, the wind, the shifting rocks, and the distant rumble of water channels. Mara smiled. The day had been long, exhausting, and filled with risk, but it had also been one of the most beautiful days she had ever known. Humans had stopped pretending. They had begun to act as they truly were, embracing their strengths, trusting their instincts, and thriving in ways the Council had never imagined. Somewhere deep inside, Mara knew this was only the beginning. The colony would face new challenges, bigger problems, and unexpected crises. But now humans would meet them not as polite, restrained observers of life, but as alive, creative, and unstoppable problem solvers. The wind carried her laughter, the laughter of humans, and even the distant sounds of curious alien whispers. For the first time, New Aegis felt like more than a colony surviving on a death world. It felt like a human world, full of possibility, ingenuity, and life. Mara turned back toward the colony. Tomorrow they would explore further, experiment more, and challenge limits they had never dared to cross. And she knew, without doubt, that humans would continue to surprise themselves and everyone else every single day. The morning sun rose slowly over New Aegis, spilling pale light across the rocky plains. For the first time in generations, the humans of the colony felt awake not just in body, but in spirit. The events of the previous days had shaken something deep within them, a realization that civility, as the Council defined it, had never been their strength. Their true strength had always been their creativity, their courage, and their willingness to act when no rule told them what to do. Mara Voss watched from the edge of the central courtyard as the colony stirred to life, smiling quietly. Today, they would push further, challenge more, and embrace the unpredictable brilliance that defined them. A group of engineers gathered near the workshop, their faces flushed with excitement. They had spent the night designing a new energy system, one that used the planet's unpredictable wind currents combined with solar panels to provide power across the colony. Normally, such an idea would have required weeks of testing, safety reviews, and approvals from multiple committees. Today, the plan was simple: experiment, learn, adapt, and succeed or fail fast. Mara approached the group, her eyes bright with anticipation. "This could change everything," she said. "We're not waiting for permission, we're not pretending, we're building what we need the way we need it." "What more do we need?" Outside the workshop, children played with small robotic helpers they had constructed, testing their designs and refining them in real time. There were no rules to hold them back, no fear of judgment, only the joy of discovery and the pride of accomplishment. Meanwhile, the alien dignitaries stationed in the observation towers watched with a mixture of confusion and admiration. They had arrived expecting to see humans acting within strict limits, following protocols, and maintaining a polished but predictable order. Instead, they saw a colony alive with experimentation, collaboration, and laughter. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but also astonishingly effective. Mara caught the eyes of one alien, a tall, slender being with iridescent skin that shimmered in the morning light. They looked puzzled but intrigued, as if unsure how to categorize the humans before them. Mara smiled and waved, a small gesture that carried boldness and warmth at the same time. The alien inclined their head slightly, a silent acknowledgement of respect. By mid-morning, Mara had gathered a team to explore a nearby canyon, one marked as dangerous due to shifting rocks and unpredictable terrain. Under previous rules, such exploration would have required months of preparation. Now, humans approached it with curiosity and ingenuity, bringing equipment they had improvised themselves. Mara led the team, pointing out paths, testing bridges, and adjusting pulleys made from leftover metal and rope. "This looks unstable," one engineer said, eyeing a narrow ledge that jutted out over the canyon. "Exactly," Mara replied, "which means we have to figure out how to cross it. There's no map for this. There's no protocol. Just us and our brains." Mara watched as her team solved problems in real time, improvising tools and methods, laughing when something broke, and celebrating when it succeeded. The canyon, once a symbol of danger, became a playground for human ingenuity. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, they reached a hidden stream running through the canyon. The water was clean and abundant, more than enough to support additional crops and wildlife. Mara knelt beside it, letting her fingers trail in the cool water. "This is exactly why we act, why we explore, why we stop pretending," she said. "We discover things that no rulebook or committee could ever predict." This planet had challenged them every day of their lives, but now, instead of fearing it, they were learning to thrive in it. They had started to embrace who they were: adaptive, clever, resourceful, and unafraid. Back at the colony, the energy system the engineers had begun testing earlier in the day started producing results. Small lights flickered to life across the settlement, turbines spun faster than anyone expected, and children ran to watch panels shift to catch sunlight more efficiently. Mara walked among them, feeling the hum of power, the energy of the colony, and the thrill of seeing plans come alive. This was not perfection. There were misfires, sparks, and unexpected noises, but it worked. And it worked because humans had stopped pretending, because they had dared to act without hesitation. In the dining hall, cooks experimented further with local ingredients. Herbs, vegetables, and even some small fungi native to New Aegis were combined in ways no recipe had ever suggested. The smells were unfamiliar but inviting, and the humans tasted eagerly, adjusting flavors with creativity and confidence. Laughter and discussion filled the room, a symphony of voices learning, experimenting, and celebrating human ingenuity. Even the aliens observed silently, intrigued by the resourcefulness and boldness they were witnessing. As evening approached, Mara gathered the colony's leaders and volunteers for a planning session. They discussed new initiatives: expanding the gardens, exploring other canyons, improving the energy system, and creating a small observation post to monitor weather patterns. Everyone contributed ideas, from the youngest child who suggested a clever pulley for irrigation, to the engineers who proposed an array of small solar concentrators. Every voice mattered, and every idea was considered. In past years, these discussions would have been formal and controlled, dominated by protocol and hierarchy. Now they were free-flowing, energetic, and productive. Mara addressed the group, her voice carrying warmth and authority. "We are learning something important," she said. "This planet is harsh, unpredictable, and beautiful. It tests us every day. And we are learning that the rules we have followed for generations are not our strength. Our strength is our creativity, our courage, and our willingness to act when no one else will. Today, we are not pretending. We are being human, and that is more powerful than any rulebook." Mara smiled, knowing that this was more than a shift in behavior. It was a shift in mindset, a recognition that humans did not need to follow protocols to survive. They needed to trust themselves and each other. As night fell over New Aegis, the colony glowed with lights from workshops, homes, and small fires. Mara stood on a ridge overlooking the settlement, the wind carrying the scent of cooked food, fresh soil, and warm laughter. She watched humans moving freely, experimenting boldly, and celebrating small victories. Children tested devices, engineers adjusted panels, and cooks shared new dishes. The aliens observed in silence, unable to reconcile the chaos with the results they saw. Mara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The humans of New Aegis had begun to understand that civility, as defined by outsiders, was not their strength. Their strength lay in their creativity, adaptability, and courage. And today, they had demonstrated it more clearly than ever. The planet had tested them, as it always would, but instead of shrinking under the challenge, they had risen to meet it. She turned her gaze to the distant horizon, where the mountains of New Aegis rose jagged and imposing. Tomorrow, they would explore further, experiment more, and push the boundaries of what humans could do on a death world. Mara felt a thrill of anticipation, knowing that every challenge was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to thrive. Humans were no longer pretending. They were alive, bold, and unstoppable in their pursuit of survival and excellence. The wind swept across the cliffs, carrying laughter, conversation, and the faint hum of energy systems running in the distance. Mara closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the life of the colony around her. For the first time, humans had not only survived a death world, they had begun to flourish in it. And in doing so, they had begun to challenge everything the Council believed about civility, order, and intelligence. Mara smiled as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The humans of New Aegis had taken the first steps toward a new way of living, one where rules served them, not the other way around. They had discovered that their true power came not from imitation, but from authenticity, courage, and the freedom to act boldly. And in the distance, the alien observers could only watch, uncertain whether to fear, admire, or perhaps even learn from the humans who had stopped pretending. Mara knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. New Aegis and its humans had much more to teach, not only themselves, but anyone who thought they could predict or control them. The night was alive, filled with possibility, laughter, and quiet triumph. Humans had discovered something profound. When freed from pretense, they could achieve more, explore further, and live fuller than they ever imagined. Mara looked down at the colony, her heart swelling with pride. The future was theirs to shape, and they would do it in the only way humans knew how: boldly, creatively, and together. The message from the Galactic Council arrived on New Aegis just as the morning light crept over the jagged cliffs. It was not a greeting, nor a routine update. It was an inquiry, the kind that carried weight and quiet threat. The Council had noticed anomalies in human behavior, and they wanted to understand. Mara Voss read the message carefully, noting the formal language, the unspoken skepticism, and the faint undertone of disbelief. They were watching, questioning, waiting to see whether humans were following the rules or breaking them entirely. She gathered her team in the central command hub. The air was filled with the low hum of machinery and the smell of warm metal. The engineers, scientists, and volunteers who had worked tirelessly to repair, improve, and innovate over the past days looked at her expectantly. Mara took a deep breath. "The Council is coming," she said. "They want to see what's happening here. They expect order, politeness, and predictability. What they will see instead is us being human." Now they would demonstrate that their unpredictability was not recklessness, it was ingenuity. By mid-morning, a small delegation of Council observers arrived in orbit, preparing for descent. They were not ordinary inspectors. These were beings trained to evaluate civilization, intellect, and efficiency across species. Their presence usually prompted careful, controlled displays of competence. Humans of New Aegis had long mastered this performance, maintaining the illusion of civility and order. But Mara had already decided that the performance was over. The humans continued their work, bustling with energy, laughter, and experimentation. In the workshops, engineers demonstrated their improvised energy system. Wind turbines spun in unconventional patterns, solar panels pivoted automatically to track the shifting sunlight, and small energy nodes glowed softly across the colony. Children ran among the machines, helping where they could, suggesting tweaks and watching their ideas come to life. The Council observers would see not a colony adhering to strict rules, but a vibrant, living organism thriving in the harshest conditions. Mara guided the delegation through the northern gardens next. The crops had recovered from earlier setbacks, now lush, green, and productive. Humans adjusted irrigation channels on the fly, moved water from newly discovered streams, and tested new planting methods. Their voices overlapped, debates were loud and passionate, and laughter echoed through the fields. Mara paused to watch a group of children rig a small pulley system to lift heavy crates of soil, giggling as their makeshift invention wobbled but ultimately succeeded. An alien observer tilted their head, watching with wide eyes. "They are loud," one whispered to another, their voice full of confusion, "and yet they achieve results that exceed any expected standard." Humans had none of these qualities in isolation, yet when combined with curiosity, creativity, and bold action, they became unstoppable. By midday, Mara led the council observers to the canyon system on the eastern side of the colony. The cliffs and rocks that had once seemed treacherous were now pathways for exploration. Humans moved confidently across narrow ledges, using improvised tools, ropes, and pulleys to transport equipment. Each step, each adjustment was a demonstration of ingenuity in action. Where the council would have sent reports, committees, and approval requests, humans sent ideas, solutions, and results. "Look here," Mara said, pointing to a newly discovered stream. "This water can supply the lower fields. The channels we've improvised will redirect it effectively. Nothing is permanent, everything is adaptable, and nothing is beyond our ability to manage." No formal procedures were observed, and yet everything functioned perfectly. After the canyon, the delegation was guided to the energy demonstration field. Engineers had connected wind turbines, solar panels, and water nodes into a single system that fed energy across the colony. They explained their improvised adjustments, the failures they had overcome, and the improvements they planned next. Mara encouraged open dialogue, allowing anyone to question or suggest changes, including the children who had helped design parts of the system. The aliens watched in stunned silence. "They do not follow our expectations," one said quietly. "Yet their outcomes are superior, efficient, creative, resilient." The humans had learned something profound. Civility and rule-following were not intelligence. Intelligence was adaptability, ingenuity, and collaboration. And humans, free from the need to perform, had discovered the full extent of their power. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the settlement, Mara convened the colony for a communal gathering. Normally, formal reports to the council would have been dry and controlled, filled with rehearsed statements and polite gestures. Today, the humans did not follow the expected script. Mara addressed the council observers directly, her tone firm but warm. "You came here expecting order, precision, and civility," she said. "What you see instead is life. Life on a planet that tests every skill, every idea, and every decision. We have stopped pretending. We act boldly, we experiment openly, and we learn from every success and every failure. That is how humans thrive. That is how we survive on New Aegis. We see intelligence. You may think we are reckless. We are alive, fully alive, and we will continue to act, create, and explore without waiting for your permission." Another scribbled notes furiously, perhaps attempting to categorize what they had witnessed. Mara allowed herself a small smile. The humans of New Aegis had shown more than efficiency. They had shown vision, courage, and resilience. After the meeting, Mara walked among the colony, noting subtle changes. Humans no longer paused their work when the observers were near. Children continued their experiments, engineers tinkered with improvised devices, and cooks tried new recipes using wild ingredients. The presence of the council did not intimidate them. Instead, it highlighted a truth that Mara had long believed. Humans were not limited by rules or expectations. Their creativity and determination were boundless. In the evening, as stars began to appear in the sky, the colony gathered around communal fires. Mara sat with engineers and children, sharing stories of discovery and innovation from the day. The council observers remained at a respectful distance, observing quietly, their expressions unreadable but attentive. Mara told stories of the canyon exploration, the energy system, and the newly discovered water channels, emphasizing how improvisation, courage, and collaboration had led to success. One child asked, "Why don't other planets let humans act like this?" "Here on New Aegis, we must act, think, and create constantly. Pretending to be polite or careful is a luxury we cannot afford. We are forced to be ourselves, and it makes us stronger." Mara realized that the lesson was not just for humans, it was for anyone willing to observe closely. Civilization was not about rules or order. It was about life, resilience, and the courage to act authentically. Later, Mara walked alone to the edge of the cliffs. The wind whipped around her, carrying the faint smell of earth and water. Below, the colony glowed with warm lights, workshops humming, children laughing, and humans working together in a harmony born from freedom, not obligation. Mara took a deep breath. Today had been more than a demonstration. It had been a revelation. The council had seen firsthand that humans were powerful not because they followed instructions, but because they trusted themselves, embraced uncertainty, and acted boldly. The stars reflected in the streams of water that cut through the cliffs, twinkling like tiny guides in the darkness. Mara's mind wandered to the days ahead. The colony would face new challenges, unknown dangers, and surprises that no human or alien could predict. But she knew with certainty that humans were ready. They were no longer pretending. They were alive, brilliant, and unstoppable. She turned back toward the settlement, the sound of laughter and conversation rising from the workshops and fires. The council observers had come expecting controlled civility and order. Instead, they had witnessed creativity, courage, and collaboration on a scale no one could have predicted. Mara smiled at the thought. Perhaps, she considered, the galaxy had never truly understood humans. Perhaps it was time they did. Tonight, the colony would rest. Tomorrow, they would explore further, experiment more, and push limits once thought impossible. Mara knew that humans would continue to surprise not only themselves, but the galaxy. She had seen it in the children's bright eyes, the engineers' determination, and the laughter that echoed across the cliffs. Humans had stopped pretending, and in doing so, they had begun to teach the universe what it meant to be alive. As the night deepened, the colony glowed softly under the starlit sky, alive with possibility, laughter, and quiet triumph. Myra closed her eyes and let the wind carry her thoughts. New Aegis was no longer just a colony surviving on a death world. It was a living testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the courage to act boldly. The council observers would return to their ships with reports full of confusion, admiration, and perhaps a hint of awe. Myra allowed herself a small laugh, soft and free. Humans had not only survived, they had thrived, and in doing so they had shown that the strength of humanity was far greater than anyone, even the council, had ever imagined. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. Tomorrow, humans would act again, and the galaxy would continue to watch, unsure whether to fear, admire, or learn from the species that had finally stopped pretending. Myra looked at the stars, at the cliffs, at the colony alive below her. She felt certain of one truth: humans were unstoppable when they were true to themselves. The sun rose over New Aegis like a pale guardian, brushing the cliffs and plains with gold and gray light. The colony was already stirring, alive with movement, laughter, and energy. Humans no longer moved cautiously, no longer whispered polite words to mask their thoughts, and no longer performed for anyone's approval. They acted freely, creatively, and together, a network of minds and hands working in harmony with the death world that had once been a source of fear. Mara Voss stood at the edge of the central courtyard, surveying the colony. Her heart swelled with pride and anticipation. Today, she knew, would be extraordinary. The energy system the humans had improvised was now fully operational, feeding power to the workshops, homes, and communal spaces. Children rushed to test small devices they had built overnight, sending tiny wind turbines spinning and miniature robots scuttling across the rocky ground. Engineers adjusted panels and pipelines with careful experimentation, laughing at unexpected results and celebrating successful improvisations. Everyone was connected, every action mattered, and every voice contributed. Mara walked among them, offering encouragement and guidance, though no one needed her permission to act. The colony had become a living demonstration of human ingenuity and adaptability. The council observers were scheduled to arrive again today, and this time, Mara knew, they would witness something more profound than yesterday's displays. Yesterday had been demonstration, today would be revelation. Humans were not merely surviving, they were thriving. They had embraced their instincts, creativity, and courage, and in doing so had discovered an unexpected strength, the power of being fully themselves. Mara gathered a small team to begin the morning with exploration. The cliffs to the east had revealed a series of caves during recent storms, and no maps had fully documented them. Most species would hesitate before venturing into such unknown terrain, fearing danger or misstep. Humans, however, had learned that careful improvisation could turn fear into opportunity. The team carried tools, ropes, small energy packs, and supplies they had built themselves, every item tested and adapted. They moved with purpose, eyes bright, voices calm yet lively. Mara led them with quiet confidence, guiding but not commanding, suggesting but not dictating. As they approached the first cave, the team paused. A wide opening gaped before them, rocks jagged and sharp, shadows stretching deep into the darkness. One of the engineers, a young woman named Lyra, frowned. It looks dangerous, she said. Mara shook her head gently. It looks unknown. That is different. We can learn from it, explore it, and thrive because of it. Danger is only a challenge, not a barrier. The cave twisted and branched, some passages narrow, others opening into wider chambers. The team explored methodically, noting water seepage, stable ledges, and hidden pockets that might contain resources. Every discovery was celebrated, every problem solved with teamwork and ingenuity. As they ventured deeper, they found a small underground stream, its water clear and abundant. Mara knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink. This will support more gardens, she said. We can redirect it safely, expand our crops, and provide for more people. This cave is a gift, not a risk. They tested each step carefully, adjusting as they went, learning and refining. Laughter and discussion filled the air, their voices echoing through the caverns. Mara watched them, filled with awe. The humans had turned what could have been fear into a source of life, learning, and joy. Meanwhile, back at the colony, others were engaged in similar feats of creativity and collaboration. The energy system hummed steadily, powered by wind turbines and solar panels adjusted overnight to catch the morning light. Children experimented with small inventions. Engineers built new devices to support the water and energy systems, and cooks prepared meals from fresh vegetables, herbs, and fungi, tasting and adjusting with confidence. The colony was alive in a way no observer could have predicted, messy, loud, inventive, and undeniably effective. By midday, Mara returned with her exploration team. They emerged from the cave system carrying water samples, soil from new pockets, and observations that would inform future improvements. The council observers were waiting, their expressions unreadable but attentive. Mara did not pause for politeness. She addressed them directly, her voice steady and warm. You came here expecting order, civility, and compliance, she said. Instead, you see humans thriving. We do not follow your rules because we do not need them. We follow our instincts, our creativity, and our courage. We adapt, we learn, we explore. That is how humans survive and thrive. And that is how we flourish on New Aegis. What you see is life, growth, and intelligence. We do not pretend to be civilized, because civilization, as you define it, has never been our measure of worth. Our measure is creativity, adaptability, and the courage to act when necessary. The observers took notes, whispered to each other, and occasionally tilted their heads in fascination. Mara smiled. They could not deny the results. Humans were thriving, not in spite of their unpredictability, but because of it. By late afternoon, Mara called a meeting in the central square. The entire colony gathered, children, engineers, cooks, teachers, and volunteers. Fires burned softly in the wind, and the smell of fresh food and warm metal filled the air. Mara addressed them, her words carrying both authority and warmth. People of New Aegis, she said, we have learned something important. For generations, we have followed rules, performed for others, and pretended to be civilized. We have done what we thought was expected, but today we know the truth. Civility is not strength. Pretending is not power. Our strength is being ourselves, being creative, bold, and unafraid to act. The Council has seen it. The galaxy will see it. And we will continue to thrive, not by following rules, but by trusting ourselves. Children ran in circles, engineers clapped hands together, and cooks raised their knives in celebration. Even the alien observers looked on, uncertainty and admiration in their expressions. Mara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was more than a victory, it was a declaration. Humans were no longer pretending. They were alive, thriving, and unstoppable. As evening settled, the colony gathered around fires and workstations, continuing their work, their laughter, and their learning. Mara walked among them, watching humans experiment, collaborate, and create. Children tested small flying devices, engineers built new irrigation channels, and cooks experimented with new dishes using ingredients from the newly discovered cave streams. The colony buzzed with life, energy, and joy. Mara paused at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the vast plains, jagged rocks, and distant mountains. The wind carried the sounds of the colony below, a symphony of movement, laughter, and ingenuity. She thought of the days ahead, new explorations, new experiments, and new challenges. Humans would face each one with the same creativity, courage, and determination that had brought them this far. The stars began to appear in the sky, twinkling like tiny guides across the vast darkness. Mara smiled as she watched the humans move freely, creating, learning, and thriving. She knew that the galaxy had never truly understood humans, and perhaps it never would. But it did not matter. Humans were no longer defined by rules, appearances, or expectations. They were defined by their actions, their ingenuity, and their courage. Mara turned back toward the colony, where fires glowed, devices hummed, and voices rose in joyful noise. The council observers had seen the truth. Humans were extraordinary not because they followed instructions, but because they embraced life fully, creatively, and boldly. Mara felt a deep sense of peace. Humans had stopped pretending. They were alive in a way that no rulebook, committee, or expectation could ever measure. The night deepened, stars scattered across the sky, and the colony glowed with warmth and energy. Mara closed her eyes, letting the wind carry her thoughts. This was more than survival. This was flourishing. This was humanity at its best. Tomorrow, the humans of New Aegis would rise again, explore further, experiment more, and continue to thrive. They had discovered their true strength, their true purpose, and their true power to act boldly, think creatively, and live fully. And in doing so, they had shown the galaxy what it meant to be truly human. Mara opened her eyes and smiled, the night alive around her. The humans of New Aegis had stopped pretending. They were free, brilliant, and unstoppable, and the galaxy would never forget it.